Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more philosophy. Today we're diving back into the works of Georg Hegel. This is The Science of Logic. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It's not the format for everyone, but some people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. In a particular note, I do not really talk about the things that I agree with as much as I do the things that I don't, so sometimes I have things to add and sometimes I don't. With that being said, let us dive in and continue our exploration of the science of logic with Book 1, The Doctrine of Being, with what must the beginning of science be made? It is only in recent times that there has been a new awareness of the difficulty of finding a beginning in philosophy, and the reason for this difficulty, and so also the possibility of resolving it, have been discussed in a variety of ways. The beginning of philosophy must be either something mediated or something immediate, and it is easy to show that it can be neither the one nor the other, so either way of beginning runs into contradiction. Footnote I. There is an allusion here to Fichte, Grunderlage de Gassamenten. I do not know how to speak German, so anything that I try is going to make it not sound good. I do not intentionally mispronounce anything, but I do not have a full grasp of everyone's language, so sometimes I mispronounce. The principle of philosophy also expresses a beginning, of course, but the principle of philosophy also expresses a beginning, of course, but not so much a subjective as an objective one, the beginning of all things. The principle is a somehow determinate content, water, the one, nous, idea or substance, monad, etc. If any of those particular definitions are a problem for you, I have an entire playlist called Exploring Esoterica. It is linked in the corner above, and we talk in some great detail about nous and the monad and the various beginnings. So, if you are interested, there is a lot of content there. Okay, so somehow determinate content, water, the one, nous, idea or substance, monad, etc. Or if it designates the nature of cognition and is therefore meant simply as a criterion rather than an objective determination, as thinking, intuition, sensation, I, even subjectivity, then here too, the interest lies in the content determination. The beginning, as such, on the other hand, as something subjective in the sense that it is an accidental way of introducing the exposition, is left unconsidered, a matter of indifference, and consequently, also, the need to ask with what a beginning should be made remains of no importance in the face of the need for the principle in which alone the interest of the fact seems to lie. The interest as to what is the truth, the absolute ground of everything. That is something that we are not going to agree on. It doesn't matter how much speculation is done upon the beginning, nobody is going to agree on the beginning. Some people believe that God spoke and therefore the universe was created. Other people believe that there was a big bang and it was completely independent of any guiding force whatsoever. And in between those two extremes is a wide selection of the rest of humanity. And none of us know, right? There are speculations about the Big Bang. None of them have been proven. As a matter of fact, many of them have been disproven. And so we do not say that we know where the beginning came from. I have my speculations. I talk about them quite often. They are all involved in those playlists linked in the corner above. But I believe in God fully, emphatically, 100%. I still maintain that that is the realm of speculation. Everything in my existence, all of my experience, guides me towards that belief that there is a God, that He created everything, and He is a relative term because people use it. God is beyond the definitions of gender. But I believe that fully, firmly, and emphatically, and still will maintain that it is speculation and nobody can prove it. Right? And so that is something that we have to keep in mind as we go through any speculation on the beginning. Nobody will ever know. None of us were there, and as far as I'm aware, there is no scientific proofs whatsoever that the Big Bang actually happened in the way in which they speculate that it did. So it is important to maintain speculation as speculation. It is important to maintain fact as fact, and fact is something from which we can duplicate or prove. But the modern perplexity about a beginning proceeds from a further need. Importance in the face of the need for a principle in which alone the interest of the fact seems to lie. But the modern perplexity about a beginning proceeds from a further need which escapes those who are either busy demonstrating their principle dogmatically or skeptically looking for a subjective criterion against dogmatic philosophizing, and is outright denied by those who begin, like a shot from a pistol, from the inner revelation, from faith, intellectual intuition, etc., and who would be exempt from method and logic. That is why I made sure to stop and talk about what we just did, right? I haven't read this ahead of time. We read these together, and so I don't know what's coming up, and when they say the same thing as me, it's just coincidence. Footnote 2. The allusion here is most likely to Jacobi, also the preface of Phenomenology. All right. If earlier abstract thought is at first interested only in the principle as content, but is driven as philosophical culture advances to the other side to pay attention to the conduct of the cognitive process, then the subjective activity has also been grasped as an essential moment of objective truth. And with this there comes the need to unite the method with the content, the form with the principle. Thus, the principle ought to be also the beginning, and that which has priority for thinking ought to be also the first in the process of thinking. Here, we have only to consider how the logical beginning appears. The two sides from which it can be taken have already been named, namely, either by way of mediation, or as result, or immediately as beginning proper. This is not the place to discuss the question apparently so important to present-day culture, whether the knowledge of truth is an immediate awareness that begins absolutely, a faith, or rather a mediated knowledge. Truth has to be proven. Something can be assumed as a truth and later proven to be true, but unless it is proven, it is not true. Right? Your beliefs do not make that any different. My belief in God does not make God true. It makes it true to me, but that is subjective. That is not objective. And so faith and truth do not belong in the same sentence. I have faith. I believe that it is based upon truth, but it is my understanding of the truth. Insofar as the issue allows passing treatment, this has already been done elsewhere. In my Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences, 3rd edition, in the prefatory concept. Here, we may quote from it only this, that there is nothing in heaven or nature or spirit or anywhere else that does not contain just as much immediacy as mediation. So, that both these determinations prove to be unseparated and inseparable, and the opposition between them, nothing real. As for scientific discussion, a case in point is every logical proposition in which we find the determinations of immediacy and mediacy, and where there is also entailed, therefore, a discussion of their opposition and their truth. I'm 100% on board with that, right? We can discuss all kinds of things, and what should be discussed primarily is the opposite, right? If you believe something, you should steelman that, and then you should argue the other side steelman. The best possible argument against your belief every single time. And if there is a new argument that you were unaware of, steelman that, and then set it against your belief and see whether it stands. See whether it makes it through the test. And that is a test. That is the logical test that we go through, right? Is this true? Yes or no? What verifiable evidence do we have? Yes or no? This opposition, when connected to thinking, to knowledge, to cognition, assumes the more concrete shape of immediate or mediated knowledge. And it is then up to the science of logic to consider the nation of cognition in general, while the more concrete forms of the same cognition fall within the scope of the science of spirit and the phenomenology of spirit. But to want to clarify the nature of cognition prior to science is to demand that it should be discussed outside science, and outside science this cannot be done, at least not in the scientific manner, which alone is the issue here. A beginning is logical, in that it has to be made in the element of a free, self-contained thought. In pure knowledge, it is thereby mediated, for pure knowledge is the ultimate and absolute truth of consciousness. We said in the introduction that the phenomenology of spirit is the science of consciousness, its exposition. That consciousness has the concept of science. I should have done phenomenology of spirit first, but I didn't know it was a thing. So, that consciousness has the concept of science, that is, pure knowledge, for its result. Footnote 3, and it's just a reference to somewhere else. To this extent, logic has for its presupposition the science of spirit in its appearance, a science which contains the necessity, and therefore demonstrates the truth, of the standpoint which is pure knowledge, and of its mediation. In this science of spirit, in its appearance, the beginning is made from empirical, sensuous consciousness, and it is this consciousness which is immediate knowledge in the strict sense. There, in this science, is where its nature is discussed. Any other consciousness, such as faith in divine truths, inner experience, knowledge through inner revelation, etc., proves, upon cursory reflection, to be very ill-suited as an instance of immediate knowledge. Again, that is why I took the time to point out that we need to keep speculation where it belongs. In the said treatise, immediate consciousness is also that which in the science comes first and immediately, and is therefore a presupposition. But in logic, the presupposition is what has proved itself to be the result of that preceding consideration, namely the idea as pure knowledge. Logic is the pure science, that is, pure knowledge in the full compass of its development. But in that result, the idea has the determination of a certainty that has become truth. It is a certainty which, on the one hand, no longer stands over and against a subject matter confronting it externally, but has interiorized it, is knowingly aware that the subject matter is itself, and, on the other hand, has relinquished any knowledge of itself that would oppose it to objectivity and would reduce the latter to a nothing. It has externalized this subjectivity and is at one with its externalization. I don't disagree with any of this. That's why I'm not extrapolating upon it. Right? Knowledge is subjective until it has been objectively proven, and that objective proving is by necessity externalization, right? Taking it out of my head and then testing it against actual things. Now, starting with this determination of pure knowledge, all that we have to do is ensure that the beginning will remain immanent to the science of this knowledge is to consider or rather, setting aside every reflection simply to take up what is there before us. Pure knowledge, thus withdrawn into this unity, has sublated every reference to another and to mediation. It is without distinctions and thus distinctionless. It ceases to be knowledge. What we have before us is only simple immediacy. Simple immediacy is itself an expression of reflection. It refers to the distinction from what is mediated. The true expression of this simple immediacy is therefore pure being. Just as pure knowledge should mean nothing but knowledge as such, so also pure being should mean nothing but being in general. Being and nothing else, without further determination and filling. Being is what makes the beginning here. It is presented, indeed, as originating through mediation, but a mediation which, at the same time, sublates itself, and the presupposition of a pure knowledge, which is the result of finite knowledge, of consciousness. But if no presupposition is to be made, if the beginning is itself to be taken immediately, then the only determination of this beginning is that it is to be the beginning of logic, of thought as such. There is only present the resolve, which can also be viewed as arbitrary, of considering thinking as such. The beginning must then be absolute, or, what means the same here, to be an abstract beginning, and so there is nothing that it may presuppose, must not be mediated by anything or have a ground, ought to be rather itself the ground of the entire science. It must, therefore, be simply an immediacy, or rather only immediacy itself. Just as it cannot have any determination with respect to another, so too it cannot have any within. It cannot have any content, for any content would entail distinction, and the reference of distinct moments to be each other, and hence a mediation. The beginning is therefore pure being. That would be the first plane of existence for sure. If you are unfamiliar with what that means, you should check out the Esoterica playlist. After this simple exposition of what alone first belongs to the simplest of all simples, the logical beginning, we may add the following further reflections, which should not serve, however, as elucidation and confirmation of the exposition. This is complete by itself, but are rather occasioned by notions and reflections which may come our way beforehand, and yet, like all other prejudices that antedate the science of logic, must be disposed of within the science itself, and are therefore to be patiently deferred until then. The insight that absolute truth must be a result, and conversely, that a result presupposes a first truth, which, because it is first, objectively considered is not necessary, and from the subjective side is not known. This insight has recently given rise to the thought that philosophy can begin only with something which is hypothetically and problematically true, and that at first, therefore, philosophizing can be only a quest. This is a view that Reinhold has repeatedly urged in the later states of his philosophizing, and must be given credit for being motivated by a genuine interest in the speculative nature of philosophical beginning. A critical examination of this view will also be an occasion for introducing a preliminary understanding of what progression in logic generally means, for the view has direct implications for the nature of this advance. Indeed, as portrayed by it, progression in philosophy would be rather a retrogression and a grounding, only by virtue of which it then follows as result that that with which the beginning was made was not just an arbitrary assumption, but was in fact the truth, and the first truth at that. It must be admitted that it is an essential consideration, one which will be found elaborated again within the logic itself, that progression is a retreat to the ground, to the origin and the truth on which the beginning was made, and from which it is in fact produced, depends. Thus, consciousness, on its forward path from the immediacy with which it began, it led back to the absolute knowledge, which is its innermost truth. This truth, the ground, is then also that from which the original first proceeds, the same first which, at the beginning, came on the scene as something immediate. It is most of all in this way the absolute spirit, which is revealed as the concrete and supreme truth of all being, comes to be known, as at the end of the development it freely externalizes itself, letting itself go into the shape of an immediate being, resolving itself into the creation of a world which contains all that fell within the development preceding that result, and which, through the reversal of position with its beginning, is converted into something dependent on the result as principle. Essential to science is not so much that a pure immediacy must be the beginning, but that the whole of science is in itself a circle, in which the first becomes also the last, and the last also the first. Conversely, it follows that it is just as necessary to consider as result that into which the movement returns as to its ground. In this respect, the first is just as much the ground, and the last a derivative, since the movement makes its start from the first, and by correct inferences arrives at the last as the ground. This last is result. Further, the advance from that which constitutes the beginning is to be considered only as one more determination of the same advance, so that this beginning remains as the underlying ground of all that follows without vanishing from it. The advance does not consist in the derivation of another or an other, or in the transition to a truly other. Inasmuch as there is a transition, it is equally sublated again. Thus, the beginning of philosophy is the ever-present and self-preserving foundation of all subsequent developments, remaining everywhere immanent in its further determinations. In this advance, the beginning thus loses the one-sidedness that it has when determined simply as something immediate and abstract. It becomes mediated, and the line of scientific forward movement consequently turns into a circle. It also follows that what constitutes the beginning, because it is something still undeveloped and empty of content, is not yet truly known at that beginning, and that only science, and science fully developed, is the complete cognition of it, replete with content, and finally truly grounded. All right, I'm going to bring this into the realm of actuality, right? These are great concepts, and I'm getting what he's putting down here. What is being said here is, if you go to the Esoterica playlist, right, we're working through Helena Blavatsky at the present moment. And at the time of her writing, there was no understanding of the atom, right? The elemental atoms, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, the individualized atoms. They had theories based upon molecules, right? The alchemical work led to the discovery of hydrogen by the separation in the process of evaporation of hydrogen from oxygen, and the separation of the hydrogen from the oxygen. And that led into a knowledge of atoms, which we have been able to confirm through the use of the electron microscope. In the beginning, there was a understanding of the elements, right? There's fire, air, water, earth. Those are the elements. Through a gradual understanding, we came to a better understanding that there are individualized elements, even if we didn't understand them fully and completely yet. And that created a new base, right? A new ground, as he is putting it here. The ground elevated. We're no longer going back to the four primeval elements. We now understand that there are underlying elements within those elements. Then we get the electron microscope, and we're able to further determine the difference between the elements, and that becomes the new ground. That's what he's talking about here with theoretical concepts. You start with a supposition, you work through the logic to figure out whether the supposition is true. And if the supposition is true, it becomes the ground. And from that ground, now you can make new suppositions. That's what's being outlined here, and I just wanted to put it in a different, non-conceptual way so that it was probably a little bit easier to digest. Hopefully, that was a little bit easier to digest. Back to the text. But, for this reason, because it is as absolute ground that the result finally emerges, the progression of this cognition is not anything provisory. Still problematic and hypothetical, but must be determined through the nature of the matter at issue and of the content itself. Nor is the said beginning an arbitrary and only temporary assumption. All right, let's check that footnote. As Reinhold thought. An only temporary assumption, or something which seems to be an arbitrary and tentative presupposition, but of which it is subsequently shown that to make it to the starting point was indeed the right thing to do. This is not, as when we are instructed to make certain constructions in order to aid the proof of a geometrical theorem, and only in retrospect, in the course of the proof, does it become apparent that we did well to draw precisely these lines, and then, in the proof itself, to begin by comparing them or the enclosed angles, though the line drawing or the comparing themselves escape conceptual comprehension. So, we have just given, right within science itself, the reason why in pure science the beginning is made with pure being. This pure being is the unity into which pure knowledge returns, or, if this knowledge, as form, is itself still to be kept distinct from its unity, then pure being is also its content. It is in this respect that this pure being, this absolute immediate, is just as absolutely mediated. However, just because it is here as the beginning, it is just as essential that it should be taken in the one-sidedness of being purely immediate. If it were not this pure indeterminacy, if it were determined, it would be taken as something mediated, would already be carried further than itself. A determinate something has the character of an other with respect to a first. It thus lies in the nature of a beginning itself, that it should be being and nothing else. There is no need, therefore, of other preparations to enter philosophy, no need of further reflections or access points. Nor can we derive a more specific determination or a more positive content for the beginning of philosophy from the fact that it is such a beginning. Footnote 6. The allusion is still to Reinhold. For here, at the beginning, where the fact itself is not yet at hand, philosophy is an empty word, a received and yet unjustified notion. Pure knowledge yields only this negative determination, namely, that the beginning ought to be abstract. If pure being is taken as the content of pure knowledge, then the latter must step back from its content, allowing it free play and without determining it further. Or, again, inasmuch as pure being is to be considered as the unity into which knowledge has collapsed, when at the highest point of union with its objectification, knowledge has then disappeared into this unity, leaving behind no distinction from it, and hence no determination for it. Nor is there anything else present, any content whatever, that could be used to make a more determinate beginning with it. But it may be said the determination of being assumed as so far as the beginning can also be let go, so that the only requirement would be that a pure beginning should be made. Nothing would then be at hand except the beginning itself, and we must see what this would be. This position could be suggested also for the benefit of those who are either not comfortable, for whatever reason, with beginning with being, and even less with the transition into nothing that follows from being, or who simply do not know how else to make a beginning in a science except by presupposing a representation which is subsequently analyzed. The result of the analysis then yielding the first determinate concept in the science. If we also want to test this strategy, we must relinquish every particular object that we may intend, since the beginning, as the beginning of thought, is meant to be entirely abstract, entirely general, all form, no content. We must have nothing, therefore, except the representation of a mere beginning as such. We have, therefore, only to see what there is in this representation. As yet there is nothing, and something is supposed to become. The beginning is not pure nothing, but a nothing, rather, from which something is to proceed. Also being, therefore, is already contained in the beginning. Therefore, the beginning contains both being and nothing. It is the unity of being and nothing, or is non-being, which is at the same time being, and being, which is at the same time non-being. Further, being and nothing are present in the beginning as distinguished, for the beginning points to something other. It is a non-being which refers to an other. That which begins, as yet, is not. It only reaches out to being. The being contained in the beginning is such, therefore, that it distances itself from non-being, or sublates it, as something which is opposed to it. But, further, that which begins already is, but is also just as much not yet. The opposites, being and non-being, are therefore in immediate union in it, or the beginning in their undifferentiated unity. All right, now, a conceptualization for this can be a light switch, right? When the light switch is in the off position, the potential still exists on the other side of the light switch for electricity to flow to the light. But it is not until the beginning, when you flip the switch, that it actually completes the current to the light. It's the same thing here, right? There is a beginning, but in the beginning, it is not quite yet. It is still there, the potentiality exists, but it is not yet differentiated into the current that flows to the light. I think that's a pretty good way of summarizing this particular part. An analysis of the beginning would thus yield the concept of the unity of being and non-being, or, in a more reflected form, the concept of the unity of differentiated and undifferentiated being, or of the identity of identity and non-identity. Footnote 7. This is Hegel's earliest formulation of his position. This concept, like differentiation, is once it has been, then you can identify, right? So undifferentiated is the potentiality prior to the switch. Differentiated is the existence after the switch. This concept could be regarded as the first, purest, that is, most abstract, definition of the absolute, as it would indeed be if this issue were just the form of definitions and the name of the absolute. In this sense, just as such an abstract concept would be the first definition of the absolute, so all further determinations and developments would be only more determinate and richer definitions of it. But let those who are not satisfied with being as the beginning, since being passes over into nothing and what emerges is the unity of the two, let them consider what is more likely to satisfy them. This beginning that begins with the representation of the beginning and an analysis of it, an analysis that is indeed correct yet equally leads to the unity of being and non-being, or a beginning which makes being the beginning. But regarding this strategy, there is still a further observation to be made. The said analysis presupposes that the representation of the beginning is known. Its strategy follows the example of other sciences. These presuppose their object and presume that everyone has the same representation of it and will find in it roughly the same determinations which they have collected here or there through analysis, comparison, and sundry argumentation, and they then offer it as representations. But that which constitutes the absolute beginning must likewise be something otherwise known. Now, if it is something concrete and hence in itself variously determined, then this connectedness, which is in itself is presupposed as a known, the connectedness is thereby adduced as something immediate, which, however, it is not. For it is connectedness only as a connection of distinct elements, and therefore contains mediation within itself. Further, the accidentality and arbitrariness of the analysis and the specific mode of determination affect the concrete internally. Which determinations are elicited depends on what each individual happens to discover in his immediate accidental representation. This connection, contained within a concrete something, within a synthetic unity, is necessary only in so far as it is not found already given, but is produced rather by the spontaneous return of the moments back into this unity, a movement which is the opposite of the analytical procedure that occurs rather within the subject and is external to the fact itself. Here we then have the precise reason why that which the beginning is to be made cannot be anything concrete, anything containing a connection within itself. It is because, as such, it would presuppose within itself a process of mediation and the transition from a first to another, of which process the concrete something, now become a simple, would be the result. But the beginning ought not itself to be already a first and an other. For anything which is in itself a first and an other implies that an advance has already been made. Consequently, that which constitutes the beginning itself, is to be taken as something unanalyzable, taken in its simple, unfilled immediacy, and therefore as being, as complete emptiness. If, impatient with this talk of an abstract beginning, one should say that the beginning is to be made not with the beginning, but directly with the fact itself, well then, this subject matter is nothing else than that empty being. For what this subject matter is, that is precisely what ought to result only in the course of the science, what the latter cannot presuppose to know in advance. You can speculate that when you turn the light on, or when you flip the switch, that the light will come on, but until it actually happens, it is the concept that it will happen, right? It is not a proved thing until it is proved. That is kind of what is being said here. If you know the fact, then it is the abstract beginning, right? That is the point from which the ground is now set. On any other form, otherwise assumed in an effort to have a beginning other than an empty beginning, that beginning would still suffer from the same defects. Let those who are still dissatisfied with this beginning take upon themselves the challenge of beginning in some other way, and yet avoiding such defects. But we cannot leave entirely unmentioned a more original beginning to philosophy, which has recently gained notoriety, the beginning with the I. Footnote 8. Let's see what that says. The reference here is to fish. It derived from both the reflection that it all follows from the first truth must be deduced from it, and the need that this first truth should be something with which one is already acquainted, and even more than just acquainted, something of which one is immediately certain. This proposed beginning is not, as such, an accidental representation, or one which might be one thing to one subject and something else to another. For the I, this immediate consciousness of the self, appears from the start to be both itself an immediate something, and something with which we are acquainted in a much deeper sense than with any other representation. True, anything else known belongs to this I, but it belongs to it as a content which remains distinct from it, and is therefore accidental. The I, by contrast, is the simple certainty of itself. But the I is, as such, at the same time, also a concrete, or rather, the I is the most concrete of all things, the consciousness of itself as an infinitely manifold world. Before the I can be the beginning and foundation of philosophy, this concreteness must be excised, and this is the absolute act by virtue of which the I purifies itself and makes its entrance into consciousness as abstract I. But this pure I is now not immediate, is not the familiar, ordinary I of our consciousness to which everyone immediately links science. Truly, that act of excision would be none other than the elevation to the standpoint of pure knowledge in which the distinction between subject and object has disappeared. But, as thus immediately demanded, this elevation is a subjective postulate. Before it proves itself as a valid demand, the progression of the concrete I from immediate consciousness to pure knowledge must be demonstratively exhibited within the I itself through its own necessity. Without this objective movement, pure knowledge, also when defined as intellectual intuition, appears as an arbitrary standpoint, itself one of those empirical states of consciousness for which everything depends on whether someone, though not necessarily somebody else, discovers it within himself or is able to produce it there. But, inasmuch as this pure I must be essential, pure knowledge, and pure knowledge is, however, one which is only posited in the individual consciousness through an absolute act of self-elevation, is not present in it immediately. We lose the very advantage which was to derive from this beginning of philosophy, namely, that it is something with which everyone is well acquainted, something which everyone finds within himself, and to which he can attach further reflection. That pure I, on the contrary, in its abstract, essential nature, is to ordinary consciousness an unknown, something that the latter does not find within itself. Okay, so what is being said here is the I is thought, right? It is, I am conscious that I am, not that I have a body, not that my body is defined in this particular way. I think, but not in any particular sense, right? Not along particular lines. Simply think. I exist. That is the pure I. The I where I have my prejudices, right? The things that I already believe which shade the knowledge coming in. That is the impure self. That is me differentiated from the collective I, right? The fact that I think is exactly the same as the fact that you think, even if we think in different ways. That is the pure abstract I think, as opposed to I think this. That is what is being illustrated here, right? The differentiation between I as a objective existence as opposed to the I of a subjective existence. Hopefully that was a little bit clear. What comes with it is rather the disadvantage of the illusion that we are speaking of something supposedly very familiar, the I of empirical self-consciousness, where at issue is in fact something far removed from the latter. Determining pure knowledge as I acts as a continuing reminder to the subjective I, whose limitations should rather be forgotten. It leads to the belief that the prepositions and relations which result from the further development of the I occur within ordinary consciousness and can be found pre-given there. Indeed, that the whole issue is about this consciousness. This mistake, far from bringing clarity, produces instead an even more glaring and bewildering confusion. Among the public at large, it has occasioned the crudest of misunderstandings. Further, as regards the subjective determinateness of the I in general, pure knowledge does remove from it the restriction that it has when understood as standing in unsurmountable opposition to an object. But for this reason, it would be at least superfluous still to hold on to this subjective attitude by determining pure knowledge as I. For this determination not only carries with it that troublesome duality of subject and object, on closer examination, it also remains a subjective I. The actual development of the science that proceeds from the I shows that in the course of it, the object has and retains the self-perpetuating determination of an other with respect to the I. That, therefore, the I from which the start was made does not have the pure knowledge that has truly overcome the opposition of consciousness, but, rather, still entangled in appearance. In this connection, there is the further essential observation to be made that, although the I might well be determined to be in itself pure knowledge or intellectual intuition, and declared to be the beginning, in science we are not concerned with what is present in itself or as something inner, but with the external existence. Footnote 9. External existence equals Dacian, whatever that is. With the external existence, rather of what in thought is inner, and with the determinateness which this inner assumes in that existence. But whatever externalization there might be of 10, intellectual intuition, footnote 10 is whatever externalization there might be of equals was vom da ist. Okay, we're not coming back for the rest of these footnotes here. Externalization there might be of intellectual intuition at the beginning of science, or if the subject matter of science is called external, the divine, the absolute, of the eternal or absolute, this cannot be anything else than a first, immediate, simple determination. Whatever richer name be given to it than is expressed by mere being, the only legitimate consideration is how such an absolute enters into discursive knowledge and the enunciation of this knowledge. Intellectual intuition might well be the violent rejection of mediation and of demonstrative external reflection. However, anything which it says over and above simple immediacy would be something concrete, and this concrete would contain a diversity of determinations in it. But, as already remarked, the enunciation and exposition of this concrete something is a process of mediation, which starts with one of the determinations and proceeds to another, even though this other returns to the first. And this is a movement which, moreover, is not allowed to be arbitrary or acertoic. Consequently, that from which the beginning is made in any such exposition is not something itself concrete, but only the simple immediacy from which the movement proceeds. Besides, what is lacking if we make something concrete the beginning is the demonstration which the combination of the determinations contained in it requires. Therefore, if, in the expression of the absolute, or the eternal, or God, and God would have the perfectly undisputed right that the beginning be made with him, If in the intuition or the thought of them there is more than there is in the pure being, then this more should first emerge in a knowledge which is discursive and not figurative. That is 12 and 13. Let's see what that is. Okay, that's what we're not coming back to. As rich as what is implicitly contained in knowledge may be, the determination that first emerges in it is something simple, for it is only in the immediate that no advance is yet made from one thing to another. Consequently, whatever in the richer representations of the Absolute, or God, might be said or implied over and above being, all this is at the beginning only an empty word, and only being. This simple determination, which has no further meaning besides this empty something, is, as such, therefore, the beginning of philosophy. This insight is itself so simple that this beginning is as beginning in no need of any preparation or further introduction. And the only possible purpose of this preliminary disquisition regarding it was not to lead up to it, but to dispense rather with all preliminaries. Being is determined first as against another in general. Secondly, it is internally self-determining. Thirdly, as this preliminary division is cast off, it is the abstract interdeterminateness and immediacy in which it must be the beginning. According to the first determination, being partitions itself off from essence, for further on in its development it proves to be in its totality only one sphere of the concept, and to this sphere, as moment, it opposes another sphere. According to the second, it is the sphere within which fall the determinations and the entire movement of its reflection. In this, being will posit itself in three determinations. 1. As determinateness, as such, quality. 2. As sublated determinateness, magnitude, quantity. And third, as qualitatively determined quantity, measure. This division, as was generally remarked of such divisions in the introduction, is here a preliminary statement. Its determinations must first arise from the movement of being itself, and receive their definitions and justification by virtue of it. As regards the divergence of this division from the usual listing of the categories, namely, quantity, quality, relation, and modality, for Kant, incidentally, these are supposed to be only classifications of his categories, but are in fact themselves categories, only more abstract ones. About this, there is nothing to remark here, since the entire listing will diverge from the usual ordering and meaning of the categories at every point. This only can perhaps be remarked, that the determination of quantity is ordinarily listed ahead of quality, and, as a rule, this is done for no given reason. It has already been shown that the beginning is made with being as such, and hence with qualitative being. It is clear from a comparison of quality with quantity that the former is by nature first, for quantity is quality which has already become negative. Magnitude is the determinateness which, no longer one with being but already distinguished from it, is the sublated quality that has become indifferent. It includes the alterability of being without altering the fact itself, namely, being, of which it is the determination. Qualitative determinateness is, on the contrary, one with its being. It neither transcends nor stays within it, but it is immediate restrictedness. Hence, quality, as the determinateness which is immediate, is the first, and it is with it that the beginning is to be made. Measure is a relation, not relation in general, but specifically of quality and quantity to each other. The categories dealt with by Kant under relation will come up elsewhere in their proper place. That is footnote 16. Let's see if that is anything. See below. All right. We will get to that. Measure, if one so wishes, can be considered also a modality. But since with Kant, modality is no longer supposed to make up a determination of content, but only concerns the reference of the content to thought, to the subjective, the result is a totally heterogeneous reference that does not belong here. And that's footnote 17. There is an almost imperceptible, yet very important difference here between the 1812 and the 1832 edition. In the earlier text, Kant is not mentioned at all, but Hegel seems to accept what is in fact his position regarding modality. In the present text, Kant's position is explicitly mentioned, but Hegel distances himself from it. For the importance of this change, see the editor's introduction. We did not read the editor's introduction, but it is available at the link provided in the box down below. The third determination of being falls within the section quality, inasmuch as being, as abstract immediacy, reduces itself to one single determinateness as against its other determinancies inside the sphere. And that is going to bring us to the end of this section. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. The main problem with understanding this work is going to be the fact that it is complicated, right? Some of the terminology is obtruse. It is a little bit difficult to wrap your mind around some of the concepts unless you ground them, right? That's why I gave the couple of examples that I did, because you can repeatedly read through this and come to an understanding. Or you can take it outside of the conceptual and get an understanding, right? Take it from the beginning, go into the intermediateness, and then back to the foundational truth. That is hopefully something that I clarified a little bit. I don't know how much more than what I have added here that we're going to be adding going forward, right? This is a philosophical debate, so I'm sure there will be something to add. But hopefully, if I do nothing more than to just clarify it a little bit so it's a little bit easier to grasp, we'll be good. So far, I don't see anything that I necessarily disagree with, right? The beginning is absolutely the beginning, and it is differentiated from any stage in the process. So that all makes sense to me. I don't have a whole lot to argue with other than to give the examples. So if you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a sub. Throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that was stated here, drop it in the comments down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you have another work you would like to see discussed in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks or even a membership. That will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.